I could see that it was Whitey on his hands and knees in front of the fridge. Something was wrong though. His hair, it was different. At first I thought it was wet, then I realized that it was bloody. His hair was slicked down and dripping with blood. A loud crash turned my head. There was Kyle angrily pacing in the other room, mumbling about something. When I looked back, Whitey was standing quite contorted in front of me. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm a little drunk while writing this. It is extremely long as I just couldn't bear to shorten it. So if you have some time and want to come along on a revisit of this experience, then let's begin. It's just me, my friend Kyle, and my friend Whitey. We're all in Kyle's Lincoln Mark 7, but his house is empty for the weekend, so we're going to party there. It's about 7 p.m. on some Saturday evening in mid-July. I am by nature a buyer, grower, and in turn seller of hard-to-get goods and services. Ever since I can remember, that's the way it's been. So naturally, when my good friend Kyle called me up and asked if I wanted to hang out, I was intrigued. When he said that he felt dangerously upset at his mother and thought that an old-fashioned drug binge was in order, I was sold. I have to admit, as cliché as this sounds, I truly am a bad influence on my friends. I can remember when I and Whitey were in Boy Scouts, and we would sneak out early at the ends of the meetings so we could go smoke the world's worst free-rolled cigarette that I scavenged from a pack of wet cigarettes I found. I still remember the taste of 2 lungs full of construction paper smoke. Kyle had smoked grass with me lots of times. He was terribly bad at it for a 180-pound wide receiver, but nevertheless, I managed to put up with many volcanoed bowls and coughing fits. Whitey, well, I lost Whitey as far as drug experimentation quite a while ago. This is probably why I was ecstatic to hear that he wanted to do some first-time binging of his own. So I get a ride from a friend down to the spot where we all meet. I took up a funds collection for the night. This is usually the most limiting part of the evening, so I hate doing it. Fortunately, on this occasion, it was just payday and people's free-flowing anger towards their responsible peers was at an all-time high. I believe that with my 200, we had about $530 American dollars. Now, as all of you know, this is a very dangerous amount of money to buy copious amounts of drugs with, so we went to the Big D, Detroit that is. Drugs were to be purchased according to illegality. We started with the beer and liquor, so up to Pontiac we went, where we dropped in at a good friend of mine. He was just going on a beer run for the house party going on. I wasn't driving, so me and Whitey filled up the biggest drinking utensils we could find. It's getting to be a pretty good night. I've got a nice liquor buzz from the few swigs I stole and the watering pitcher of beer. Whitey is looking good. He can hold his own drinking. There was a nice brand new 4-foot bong there, but Whitey didn't want his first smoke to be out of a bong in a circle of tipsy people he didn't know. I couldn't blame him, but I had a hit anyways. It was pretty weak. I remember the paranoid look on Kyle's face driving home underage with a quarter barrel and a 5th of blue sapphire in the back seat. It worried me because we were nowhere near as twisted as I was going to get, and this was only the first item on our shopping list of illegality. It's time to go to Bake Lake, commonly known as White Lake Trailer Park. This is surprisingly enough a wasteland of marijuana cultivation. From the outside, it looks like a reasonably upscale mobile home park. But the truth is that if you know anybody, you can get top-notch grass there for unbelievable prices within 15 minutes. Whitey was actually here with me my first time about a year ago at the end of his drug curiosity phase. We pulled into the rec center, but I didn't know anyone playing basketball, so we pulled out and went towards a friend's house. We never got there though, because on the way I saw a hook I know, so we stopped, rolled down the window, worked out the pricing situation, and then gave him a ride back to his double wide. That's right, a 17-year-old kid that owns his own double wide. Drugs can be profitable, I guess. I buy weight there all the time, so we got an extra good deal. A quarter pound of the dankest buds Bake Lake has to offer, for the low price of $200. I also bought a 20 sack of the acid weed on the side, just for kicks. Mission accomplished. Kyle's overly paranoid eyes reached epic proportions as he stared at the big bag of green while I rolled up a couple of pinners. I lit 2 and passed 1 to Whitey. Inhale deeply and hold until your lungs catch flame. He did okay smoking too, better than Kyle, who abstained while driving. Kyle shares another spliff with me at the house. Whitey is blown way the hell out. His eyes looked like the inside of a swollen grapefruit. Then me and him had a couple of shots. I had forgotten how much I liked drinking with him. The evening was taking a decidedly upbeat tone. Our next quest was into Detroit itself, to the downtown district of Woodward Ave. We brought music and a cell phone. It took longer to get there because of the weed directions paradox. That is, they don't mix well. We finally found our way down. Kyle asked me, just as we were pulling up to the curb, if we could get some shrooms. Kyle had tripped on a hit of blotter I gave him once, but was always quite interested in shrooms. Talking to the crackhead on the corner was difficult, of course, it always is. You have to be careful not to get steered into a purchase you don't want. All in all, after some runaround and a police scare, we acquired 10 grams of Columbia's finest powdered product. Not that nasty half-cut crack-making shit, but the good stuff that feels like Novocaine and tastes like powdered aspirin, plus a half ounce of shrooms. They look like pea cubaneses to me, but there is no way to be sure. And 2 sugar cubes that the dealer threw in free to get rid of them. The attitude on the way home was cheery, to say the least. We blazed another joint, this time a big 8-ounce Dutch one, and I made Kyle clam bake it despite minor protest. On the way back, we stopped and got munchies, including a can of alphabet soup for Kyle. We made our way back just barely. I was quite pleased with my current buzz. Whitey and Kyle were baked out of their minds. Staring at stuff and occasionally bursting into a short giggling fit was the theme for the hour. Kyle was eager to begin drinking to catch up, but after his 3rd shot, I told him that it was best to keep liquor consumption to a minimum before dosing. Besides, my bottle of Blue Sapphire was almost gone. I refilled my pitcher and began blending up the entire half ounce of shrooms in the blender with 2 cans of orange juice concentrate and some Sunny Delight. I poured it into 2 big gulp cups and began to lay out what to expect and what to do for the evening. I figured that we were home alone in a nice, well-stocked house for the night, with nothing to do tomorrow but recover, so why not? Kyle had tripped before and was sure he wanted to trip hard again, so he quickly gulped down 1 cup of the slimy mess. Me and Whitey shared the other, and I drank slightly more as Whitey couldn't stand the taste. I can't either. I usually dry them out and pour the powder into capsules. I cozied down next to the pool. It's in direct line of sight to his 42-inch TV. We put on a movie, and I felt that everyone was slowing down too early in the evening, so I pulled out the powder. I cut up a few grams and laid them out. I did a few, just enough to get that wonderful euphoric and hyper sensation. Kyle did the rest with Whitey settling for another doobie. I grabbed the Blue Sapphire bottle and went out on the porch. Whitey joined me and we finished off the bottle. We had this really deep conversation about life and current affairs. I think he was starting to rev up from the shrooms. He passed the bottle back and said he didn't feel like drinking right now. He was a little queasy. We went back and joined Kyle, who was working himself up into a coke frenzy. He said it was balancing out the trip that was coming on. He and Whitey both started talking about what was beginning to happen. I guess I was a little jealous, because I couldn't feel anything but a light liquor warmth, a powder buzz, and heavily stoned. I was contemplating taking some acid when Kyle stood up on the pool table and suddenly announced that he was going to go fuck whatever the first mammal was that he could find. Whitey said okay, and I, knowing the powder a little better, said okay, but with the exception of me and Whitey. He then jumped down and bolted at top speed across the room and out the door. Whitey followed, walking considerably less agile, and I ensued reluctantly with a joint in hand. We followed out the front door, down the driveway, and a little way down the street where I quickly recognized Kyle, up on top of a late-model Cadillac outside of his neighbor's house. He ran up the hood in sock feet, nose encrusted with white powder, and proceeded to powerbomb the roof, creasing it down the middle. We yelled at him, and all he did was run down the back and take off down the street far too fast for us to follow. No more drugs for that person, Whitey said. He was tripping hard and loving it. We got inside and I surveyed the situation. Kyle was running through the streets at 12:30 in the morning high, drunk, tripping heavily, and bent out of his mind on powder. Whitey assured me in broken English and rapid hand gestures that he was fine. He thought that the mushrooms were leveling out. I figured Kyle was too fast of a runner to get caught by anyone, so I decided not to worry. I then took the 2 sugar cubes that we got for free and smoked all the acid weed in a makeshift Pringles can bong that worked extremely well. Whitey's trip, as it turned out, took off for quite a while longer. He was just now showing signs of hitting the peak. I remember a weird cycle of paranoid near bad trip raving comments about how Kyle was going to get arrested and the pigs would come to our door and he would get busted. We followed it up with a series of bong-smoking sessions to calm him down. The two of us had drunk probably about half of the quarter barrel by now. Whitey was desperately trying to watch a movie, smoke a joint, and drink a glass of beer at the same time. I couldn't help but stare at his only mildly morphing face that was going through a slideshow of famous artwork. First, he was the Mona Lisa, then a cubist portrait, and then he took on the pattern of a magic iBook picture. I was so stoned that I had nearly forgotten about taking the acid. I got it locked in my mind that the shrooms were nearly effectless, and that I was just so stoned from the acid weed, I guess I just didn't realize the trip creeping up on me. Whitey had leveled out and was staring at the joint floating in his beer. I got up and proudly announced that I was going to get community water for all the smoking we would be doing. Cottonmouth is a bitch. I find myself unable to recall the exact location of the nearest bathtub. I knew I needed it to fill the milk jug I had found. I later was informed that the milk jug was not empty when I found it. I apparently poured it into one of the door pockets in the fridge, however. I do not recall this. I vaguely remember a bathroom in the basement, but I'm having trouble concentrating. My mind is working in a mental loop. I suddenly became aware of the instability of the room. The corners where the walls meet are shifting side to side, waving and breathing. The black tiles are beginning to seep into the white tiles, and the clocks on the stove and microwave are projecting outward in an infinite path of light. I managed to crawl to the stairs. I seemed to have given myself the impression that the microwave display was a laser trigger for a bomb that Kyle's mom set to kill us if he did anything illegal. I felt that standing risked interrupting the beam and setting off the bomb. My trip was just reaching its peak. I finally psyched myself into traversing the stairs. They were shifting right to left in alternating steps. I remember thinking that the atoms between the air in the room and the wood of the stairs could be bribed with promises to scoop them up and take them outside where they could be free. They in turn protected me by not letting me trip and fall down the slippery steps. It took me about another half hour to get all the way down. I was twisted hard now. As I made my way down the steps, I was making my way to hell, each step another level of hell. On each one, I faced fantastic hallucinations of demons and combatants that I had to defeat in order to continue to the next step. The final one was the hardest. It resembled something like the movie Tron. I had to ride a computer-generated hoverbike in a battle to the death with Satan, who had taken the form of Pee Wee Herman. No shitting. Once I was down the stairs, I looked out into the room, suddenly aware of my mission to get water again. I made my way to the bathroom, all the while conversing with myself and the characters from just about every movie I've ever seen. They just popped up and said something, then I would respond and they would morph into someone else and carry on the conversation. I was in and out of awareness of my current surroundings. But I made it to the bathroom at last. I've spent the last hour or so looking at my freckles project purple beams of light and attempting to get in the shower to fill the milk jug. The mirror had caught me off guard. My self-image was unsettling and made me reconsider the physical boundaries of this dimension. And with that, I left this form and became many shapes. Each one is unable to get in the tub to fill the jug. I broke down in an introspective thought loop about the microcosm of my life and its meaninglessness in the grand scale of things. I eventually came to the conclusion that I must get this water to my friend before he died. With that, I stood up. My arms and legs grew long and gangly. My torso stretched and my face lengthened. It took several tries to slide into the tub. From there, I had a problem reading the knob before I turned it all the way to the cold setting and filled up the receptacle. I think that getting into the shower was my peak, because I found it considerably less difficult to get back up the stairs. I was greeted by a wickedly grinning Kyle, sitting ass first in the kitchen sink with something in his hand. His face was gaunt and expressionless, except for this big ear-to-ear smile that somehow portrayed anger to me. I looked over at a pair of feet and legs kicking on the ground, laying out of an open doorway that was very small. All I could see was the legs and feet. They were normal-sized, though. A great blue-white light was filling the room, emanating from the open mini door in pulses that sped up, eventually to the point where they became a voice, Whitey's voice. He was mumbling about the luncheon meat. I looked up at Kyle, but he wasn't there. The clock on the stove read 4:46, but the one on the microwave read hell, like you used to put on your calculator just because you were bored. As I walked towards the mini door, it grew larger and larger. I was reminded of a scene from Alice in Wonderland. I suddenly wanted to hear White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane. Once in front of it, only a few feet away, I could see that it was Whitey on his hands and knees in front of the fridge. Something was wrong, though. His hair, it was different. At first, I thought it was wet, then I realized that it was bloody. His hair was slicked down and dripping with blood. A loud crash turned my head. There was Kyle angrily pacing in the other room, mumbling about something. When I looked back, Whitey was standing quite contorted in front of me. His lips were moving really fast, but the sound came out slow and sped up to normal. I walked over and asked Kyle what was wrong with Whitey. He told me that he came home and Whitey was hiding under the pool table, raving about how we were all fake and that there was no Earth outside of his field of vision, that the entire universe was a figment of his imagination. Kyle was straight enough to use a trick I used on him once to calm him down. He told Whitey to go and get the red grapefruit out of the fridge so that he would calm down. Kyle himself, however, was handling his trip pretty well, with the exception of this can of alphabet soup he had. He said he found it when he was out jogging, but he couldn't find the tab to open it. I wasn't sharp enough yet to catch the fact that it had no tab, and so the two of us grabbed and loaded a fat bowl in the Pringles bong and went in search of a phone book so that we could call customer service and work this out. The shrooms were gone by now. The powder was long gone. The liquor was warm but not buzzing, and the grass was picking up, but the acid was still coming on strong. After an hour and a half, we managed to call several phone numbers that the operator gave us, or that we found in the phone book, none of which were even remotely related to our cause. We gave that up when Kyle started hearing the poor little noodles inside screaming for help. I pictured a can full of Jewish letter-shaped noodles with little eyes and feet, just like on the label, crying and screaming as they were drowned in their own cheese and tomato sauce by some Nazi line worker at Campbell's. We finally managed to get the can open with a piece of wood with a nail in it, and we pounded into it with the hammer we found, eventually spilling the can open on the concrete floor of the garage. I left when Kyle began eating the lifeless, drowned noodles off the floor. I went inside to find Whitey. It was about 5:45, and I had smoked my trip down to a level 3 or so. I found Whitey sitting half under the sink with 2 oven mitts on, holding a pancake griddle that had something foul-smelling all over it. Whitey calmly explained to me that he wanted to make hamburger helper, but he couldn't find a pan, so he just poured the seasoning and noodles on the griddle. Then he couldn't find any meat or water or milk, so he just poured on some orange juice that was left, and some rice he found instead of the meat, and he couldn't figure out how to turn the stove on, so he was going to hold his lighter under the pan, but he got sidetracked with the beauty of the flame. When I left him a half hour later, he was eating the uncooked noodles in orange juice with rice and powdered seasoning by the handful. I haven't seen or heard from Kyle or Whitey since I left them. My trip was winding down. It had taken on a nice mellow feel after a few lines. I fell asleep watching an old episode of Playboy After Dark, trying to decide if Hugh Hefner was immortal or not. I woke up on a cushionless couch under a plastic tarp that to this day I don't ever remember seeing before that, but I apparently stole it off of a car in someone's driveway on the way home with Whitey after we were chasing Kyle. There were a few Coke smiley faces on the pool table. Bags of grass and buds were strewn about, and food lying where it was dropped. The barrel had a slosh at the bottom, so I filled my pitcher and went in search of my friends. I found many interesting things around the house. Among them was a giant puddle of milk in front of the fridge, a dozen or so drawings of what looked like a can of soup on the counter, and a crude scribbling on the TV done in some sort of wax. An empty milk jug, Kyle sleeping naked on the floor, and an unconscious Whitey curled up into a fetal position in the corner of the porch. All in all, evidence of mass consumption of drugs. All in all, it was an enlightening experience. I would never think of toning things down. We have shared our memories and pieced together what happened, and came to the conclusion that we need a camcorder next time we decide to blow $530 on drugs.